Okay, we have everybody from the committee except for Linda, who said she's going to be running a little late.
Okay.
Thank you all for hanging in there. And guests, just out of curiosity, who is DW? You don't have to let us know who you are, but if you choose to, if you want to unmute yourself and just let us know.
My name is Dale Walker.
Hi, Dale. Welcome.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. So we're going to get started. I want to just start with a couple things before we get to the agenda. There's been among the committee several emails and conversations this past week with some people, and there's a pretty strong feeling, I think, from everybody that it's hard to come up with numbers if we haven't talked about all the other issues like density and HOAs and apartments and so on and so forth. And my answer to that, and what I'm asking you to do today, is keep those in mind, but put them aside for the moment. And Cheryl said, I thought fairly brilliantly at some point during the week.
Way too big of an exaggeration, but okay.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, that these numbers that we're going to come up with today are working numbers. And if we can just come up with a baseline of, for instance, for the, if we go with option C, which is the just a straight percentage, if we choose 17.5%, it's a working number. We will then discuss density and HOAs and so on and so forth. And if after those discussions, we decide based on our decisions, we need to come back and change that number, we will change that number. But we have to have at least a base point and a starting point. And that's what I'm asking you to do today. We've heard from all of you through email except Carol. So Carol, I'll guess we'll just get your thoughts as we go through each one of them. Is that?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Anything else before we start getting into a discussion of numbers that anybody wants to talk about beforehand? Good. Okay. I want to start with option C because it's the easiest and cleanest. And for those people either listening to the tape or listening now, go ahead, Michael. You're muted.
Sorry, I you asked a question and I was thinking about it. Would it be, I'll just put it out for the group, would it be helpful to have, just before we get into numbers, I don't know if this will make things more messy, but just before we get into the numbers, kind of everybody on the same page, what we're hearing from the survey and what we heard from budget, and what maybe at a high level, what existing city policy or just kind of to provide some bookends, because in the email chains I saw some people saying, well, the survey sentiment said this and the survey said, you know, and we're kind of looking at it different ways. Can we all get on the same page so when we have put out a number and we say this is reasonable or something, that we're all maybe coming from the same place, or at least know where we're at with it?
Yeah, and that was just about what I was going to say, so thanks.
Okay, sorry.
As we talk about each one, for the people that are listening through the video or have not been with us along the whole way, I think we just need to, as quickly as we can, you know, like under 5 minutes, do a little synopsis of what we mean. For instance, I want to start with option C. What is option C, and how does that relate to other things? So yes, if that makes, if that works for you. Cheryl? You're muted. You're muted, Cheryl.
Sorry,
Sure.
it was I couldn't see you, so I couldn't unmute myself. Sorry. I think respect, Michael. I think if we go down that path, we're going to get into this whole numbers discussion again. And what I was talking to Joe about was, it's my understanding today, we're just talking about the options, not assess necessarily a firm number to go with those options. But I think where we're getting bogged down is we're getting tangled up in the number right now, which we eventually need to land on. But I think that maybe for the sake, and you don't have to go with this, maybe for the sake of today, we should just use, X number, 17% or whatever, just to discuss the options of how that would play out. Is that my understanding what the task is today? No. Okay, good.
Because
good.
I think we did that last month. And I think what we need to do today is say, what's a working number for option C? Let's start with option C because it is easier than the others. Option C is to look at, we've already decided that we are going to consider the community as a whole rather than excluding the C1 R4 zones, the commercial-ish zones. So given that, if we are going to just use a straight percentage for the citywide number of STRs, option C says use that straight percentage. And what we need to come up with today is what number are we suggesting that we use? In the past, the number was 17.5% for the R3 SSR and R2 zones, and there was no percentage for the C1 and R4, the commercial zones. It was just as many as wanted. So now we're looking at it as a whole city. And this is where, Cheryl, I think it gets into, and Michael, the questions of when we are talking about what does the survey say and what do the numbers say? Cheryl asked me earlier, why aren't we using the numbers that Brian Sint gave us that divided it by zones, the R3 and the SSR? Because the SSR, if you look at the numbers, and the SSR is the zone around the golf course. And that's, I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's 7.5% of homes to SSRs, STRs.
It is, but
yeah.
My question was why we weren't using neighborhoods versus the land use zoning, because of what happens when you combine North Manzanita, North Beach, and South Beach. You get a skewed percentile number if you look at the two maps.
Right, I think that's the same issue, is that if we're looking at it citywide, and we're not looking at density, if you take the total number of homes, which is 1,461, and if you multiply 1,461 by a percentage, that's the percentage that option C would be giving us of STRs. So in other words, if you multiplied 1,461 by 17.5%, you would get 256 STRs in Manzanita.
And if you wanted to keep it at the current level of 263, you'd probably want to bump it up to 18% because 18% of 1461 is 263.
Right, correct. So 18% would be 263. The 17.5%, which is a number that's been put out there, is 256. Okay, so that's how option C would work. Option C would be pick a number. What is that number? And that's how many STRs would be permitted in the city of Manzanita. That would not include the UGBs, which is a question down the line. How do we handle those? Should they ever become part of Manzanita? They may or may not include HOAs that don't allow STRs. That's a conversation for down the line. It could be a higher percentage on the beach and a lower percentage in North Manzanita. That's a question for down the line. But as a city, if option B says pick one number and make that the total for Manzanita,
So irregardless of the number of homes being built, it would remain the same, the number at
That's option
256?
C, option C. So yes, if 100 homes were built over, I don't know how many years, whatever, how many years, call it 5 years. If 100 homes were built in the next 5 years, that would be an additional 17 short-term rentals, because that's 17. If I'm just going to use 17.5% for now. If you used 18%, it would be 18 homes. So that's how option C works.
Okay, so it would change the number of actual STR licenses allowed would change with the number of houses.
Correct.
Because we'd
it
be
would-
working just off of the percentage.
Exactly. And that's option
Okay.
C.
And Joe,
And-
when you're real quick, just to clarifying for everyone, when you're saying A, B, and C, are those the same A, B, and C that were mentioned in policy focus area 1? We're just putting numbers to them?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That helps.
Yeah. It's just, if we had 3 options. Option C was just a straight percent, which I think we've got down. Option A and B are a little more complicated. Option B is a strict percent, but a cap at some point if there was to act both as a stopgap if there's a huge amount of growth in homes and we want to have some control over that. And secondly, as a trigger point to reassess by the committee and by council, do we want to continue in the way we're going? And then option A is to just have a number cap, to stop with the percentages and just say, the city wants to have 265 STRs, period. No matter how many homes are built, no matter how many homes aren't built, just a straight cap. So that's your 3 options, but let's focus for a minute on the C, the straight percent. Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about how you feel the survey relates to that?
Well, so I mean, option C was one that Anupam had talked about last time, but and if he has thoughts on it too, he can step in too. The survey, and I guess that's why I asked the clarifying question, because in my mind, we have a survey. We have budget considerations, and there's a number that could potentially be applied to all 3 of them, but I won't go down that road just for the sake of answering this. Option C, I think, was really intended to as is, and I think the survey, that's the reason why, to bring it back to the survey, that's the reason why initially I proposed something like a B, and then you had some tweaks to it, and it's kind of been that idea since. But the survey says that a takeaway here is that reasonable. Some folks are saying there's a reasonable amount. Some folks are saying too many, and some are saying reasonable, or we have capacity for more. That says to me that we've either got the right number or it can go up. And that's how I read the survey there. The other part of the survey that I think is important is that we've identified these livability issues. And I think this is where Anupam has spoke to this before too, and I agree 100%, is that as we develop policy to address these livability considerations or impacts, whatever you want to call them, whether that's policy around density or proximity, or whether that's policy to address noise, parking, lighting, that people, the thought is that the reason why there's too many is because we're realizing too many of these impacts. I think this is up for discussion though. It's kind of squishy. There's some assumptions in there, but I think it's a safe assumption to say that if we address those livability concerns through policy, that, I said it before, I've got 5 short-term rentals around me, and I get along great with all of them, and all the guests who stay there, I wave, we smile, they have kids, they play with my kids. I mean, it can be a really positive element in our community. So that's why I said if there's opportunity to go up when we bring that number up based on the survey results, I think I think we can. What that number is, I don't know. I threw in 10%, but
You put in a 10% growth, but talking about just using option C right now, if you talk about just option C, what would your number be? Option C being just a straight percent growth with homes.
I would leave it as is. Option C would be as is, because I think that's the as is scenario, or sometimes we call it the no build scenario, or
So 18%,
Or
Michael,
17
would
and a
be
half. When you say as
well,
is, are you saying 18 or 17 and a half? Yeah, a good question.
18% would equal the as is number of short-term rental houses today at 263.
because we brought in the
18%.
C1 and R4.
Correct.
So like for instance, for me, I'm like, okay, I like the way it is today. If I'm going to pick option C, I would, and since we've adjusted the way we measure, we're measuring the whole city, I would keep it at the current level. And to do that, the number would be 18% to equal 263 today.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a retooling of the methodology that was used back, when that 17.5 was started. I think that's a safe, that's a justifiable explanation of that number, the 18.5, and that makes sense to use that number for option C.
Okay. I will counter, and I'm just going to go down the line and get everybody in the order I've got them on my screen. I would counter, and I would say, nope, I would go back to 17.5, just because I think as a community, when the community says, let's keep it the same was 17.5. So even, although we've added the C1 that has made the numbers jump up, I think that through attrition, we can drop those homes over a year or 2 years time and come back to the 17.5%. I think also, just to confuse things, there are 3 homes in that number that are called grandfathered STRs. I don't know why they're grandfathered, but they've been grandfathered, I believe, since 1995. Those are, if you live next door to them, they're STRs, whether they are grandfathered or not. And the reason for the grandfather could be something like they don't have the parking, but they were there in 1995. But they're still STRs. So if we probably should have had those numbers in the 17.5% in the beginning. And so if we include them now, again, 17.5%, I think, is the truer as is number. So I would go 17.5%. Phil? Go ahead, Kara.
Oh, I was just going to say, it goes back to, I think it was Deb Tinnan's idea of taking the HOAs or any block of houses that do not want to participate in or have STRs amongst their group of homes or whatever. And we have not taken those numbers out of our total available houses.
That's correct.
Right.
And we may or we may not. And that would be a discussion for after, like next month. And when we have that discussion, if we decide to take them out, then maybe we would adjust the numbers. If we decide to keep them in, maybe we adjust the numbers. But for now, it would be an as is, which includes the HOAs. So again, that's a number for next month. So first, let's get a base working number as if the HOAs.
Can I add something to that, Jen? Just to put some perspective on that, people in the community have mentioned HOAs. Just the reason I think it is good to follow Joe's point here and start with a baseline is the idea of HOAs is getting to the point of how many do you have in a particular area. And so reducing HOAs is just one way of reducing the number in the population. But we're starting by doing that and by saying we're going to have this number 263 or this percentage 17.5 or 18%. It's the same thing. Under say that scenario of reducing HOAs, it's the same as saying let's go from my 18% down to 15% or my 263 down to 247. Reducing HOAs is the same as reducing the percentage, is the same as reducing the number. So what we're talking about right now is what is this number? And what if we get to a point and we want to change HOAs, we can easily keep it at the same percent or number that we choose, or we can reduce those numbers if HOAs are in it. But it's important to keep in mind, changing the HOA number is the same as changing these numbers we're talking about today in terms of the percentage or the total.
Thanks.
Mhm.
So given that, Carol, if you were to choose a number for that straight percent, do you have a number that you would choose?
For me, well,
Yeah.
I would keep it where it is.
At
And,
17 and a half
that-
or 18? What do you consider where it is? I guess.
Oh, the percentage. I'm leaning towards option A. So I know we're talking about option C here, but I'm leaning towards a straight cap. The other piece of information that
Carol,
I,
just
oh, go ahead.
I'm just going to interrupt you. I know I don't care which one you lean to. I know which one I lean to, and it's not option C either, but it doesn't matter. What we need is, if it was option C, what percent would you feel comfortable with?
So if you like 263 today, that would be an 18%.
Correct. If you would rather have it at 250, that would be, who knows, 15, whatever. But if it was, if the city council, because it's not our choice, we're going to present all three to the council. If the city council ends up choosing option C, what number would you like them to seriously consider? What percentage?
Well, my thing is to keep it low. So I personally think 17.5% is high for the livability of the community and so I would keep it now we're at 17 or 18%. So I would vote to say to keep it lower at 17.5%.
Okay. Cheryl.
I would just say, I think for me, the interpretation of keeping it the same is 17.5%, because I think that's what most people think it's actually at when they answered that question.
Okay. Anupam?
I'd say 17.5% too, but I have to tell you, Joe, I'm not sure why we're doing this. We can all throw out numbers, but it's not relevant because it's 17.5% with an asterisk, subject to blah, 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 blah. These changes in the future. So it could be 18, it could be 20, it could be 10, who knows? So I'm just struggling with what the purpose is to pick a number, because there can be lots of asterisks next to it.
Because I'm hoping to settle most of those asterisks by next month. And that's going to and I appreciate you saying that. But I think what is I think hurting us a little bit is that we all, and I'm including myself in we have these meetings and we say, okay, we need to do this, and we need to do this next month. And then we don't start thinking about the next month until 4 days before the meeting.
Right.
So we need, as a group, if we want to get this done and present something to council in July, we need to think about it more in the next upcoming months. We need to have those discussions either by email. Patrick has suggested having an interim call just among ourselves. But we need to really focus on what are all those asterisks. Because if we do that, I think that we can answer a lot of those asterisks by next month. And why are we doing it now? So that next month, when we talk about HOAs and we talk about density, we're not saying, gosh, we don't even know where to start. Well, we do know where to start. We're going to start at 17.5 or 18%. And then we are going to move up or down from that number. So it's a starting number that just gives us some grounding, some central point that we can then talk about all the other numbers. And I feel it's important to do that.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm happy to go along with it. I also like what I think Michael started a conversation on a policy. I think that sort of speaks to, let's focus on what are some of the key issues that we have that we want to address. I'm not talking about livability issues. I'm just talking about just policy issues about where STRs are, what role, how we should think about growth in the future, etc. Anyway, if you want to pick a number, it's 17.5% for me, as it is today. Everything exactly the way it is the program today. No
Okay.
changes in
Or the way it was 3 years ago is basically what you mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Jill?
Yeah, unmute button. Well, I kind of agree with Anupam. I think we're putting the cart before the horse to come up with a number before we really know the moving parts. Like Patrick says, you know, we agree on a percentage number now, and then if we take out HOAs or put in HOAs, it's gonna reduce that number. That being said, if I have to come up with a number, I guess I'd say 17.5%.
Okay.
And can I just add one thing?
Yep.
If we're under the gun to have this done by July, then I really think that we need to adopt Patrick's proposal to meet in between our regularly scheduled meetings so that we can work through some of these things.
Okay. Let me throw something out for this month. A little self-serving, but not exactly. Nan Devlin, who is doing the flings and the Good Neighbor letter for us, is ready to start stuffing envelopes, and she has not been able to find a company to do all that for us. And so she asked me the other day if I could get some volunteers to help with a stuffing party. If you are all willing to do that, I'm willing to have my house and schedule that. And at that, we can discuss everything you want to discuss as we're stuffing. And so I'll put out some kind of doodle poll and try to get everybody to get a date where you can hopefully come. And if you can't come, we'll just set a computer up at the end of the table and you can zoom in and talk at the same time. Does that work for everybody? It'll be sometime after April 1st. I don't know when, but sometime after April 1st. Okay, so yes, we'll have a meeting in between, Jill. I think that was a good idea. And stuff while we're talking. Michael, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quick just jump in. What Anupam was saying about, whether cart before horse, or I guess my take on it is that I would have, and it's always tough when you're right in the middle of it, right? But I like the idea of kind of parsing these out as separate processes. But for me, it's now the tone of a UGB or HOA party is going to be, well, if we do this policy, then it's going to reduce the number. And while that happens, whether or not, I think it would have been great to have that almost, to some extent, develop those policies, outside of its influence of the overall number, to the extent it can. Like if we're talking about UGB homes or HOA homes, there should just be a policy based on XYZ needs and objectives, separate from does that reduce or increase the total number. It's how are we,
I also think we need to be talking from fact. We need to know, before we have a discussion about HOAs, we need to know how many are there? Which of the ones that there are don't allow HOAs? I mean, don't allow STRs. We don't have that number, and I don't think we should be making decisions without knowing those numbers. So that's something that we will, I'll try to get before April 1st with your help, Linda. So that, and I don't know if we can get those numbers. I mean, I think we know, the city knows where the HOAs are, but it's going to probably take a little digging to find out what their policies are. Carol?
Just a quick question. Is it true that Chris is no longer with coordinating the STR program? Or I don't see him here at the meeting, and I noticed there was an open position on for the STR coordinator. Have we lost him?
Not to my knowledge, we haven't lost him. Oops, let me get off.
And
Not to my
he's not
knowledge.
here. He's not here
No,
today.
yes, so we've agreed that that staff will report periodically here, but they're not going to be here on a regular basis. So
Oh, okay.
not to expect him here. But thanks, Carol. That's a good question. And I'll get back to you and let you know, but not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope that's not the case.
I hope it is.
Yeah. Phil, you have any thoughts one way or the other on this?
Well, I don't have a vote in this, so
Well, we're not voting. We're just, what's your feeling on it?
I would stay at 17.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else on option? I think where we're at on option C is as a working number, we're looking at the 17.5. And again, it's a working number. It's just, we need a starting point. Okay. Moving to option A, if we were going to talk about a simple, yes.
Joe, can I just make a real quick statement because Chris is still with us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
He's still here. So.
Yay, Chris.
Yay, Chris is right.
Option A is again, a simple cap. If we were to say, no matter how many homes are built or not built, no matter other factors, the number of homes that the city of Manzanita, the number of STR homes that the city of Manzanita should have is X. Currently, the number of homes, of STR homes that the city of Manzanita has is 263. That's not, by the way, any of you that are looking, that's not the number on the website, but that's the correct number. It's 263. So I'm going to start with Patrick because Patrick is a proponent of option A. You want to talk about it?
I would, based on all the things that we've talked about, I think we want to have a number that allows for us to kind of to pay for all the things that we're doing in our community today. That appears to be the number that we're at, so which is 263. 263, 265, if we want to make it kind of a round number, is what I would pick. And real quick, I just want to address one thing that keeps coming up, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. But the idea that based on the survey, we either have the right number or we should go up. And I just going back to the survey actually doesn't say that we should go up. The survey says that half of the respondents who were full-timers said there are too many, and only 6% said they won't. So I think there's a misconception about what the survey says, and to Michael's point that, the survey is very, very important about our decision making. I would say that it does say we might have the right number, but it doesn't say that we need to go up. So just want to put that on. That's why I picked 263, 265 as this reasonable number for balance and
Patrick, for everybody on here, can you also cite the part-timer data and the STR folks too? So full-timers are very important, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of that, but there's a lot of people who are part-time in our community, much larger amount than STR owners or full-timers. And then also people who manage STRs, I think their sentiment matters too. So
it's the same takeaway for me from their data. The part-time people said that their 12% said there were too few, right? So there isn't a huge amount of people saying we want more.
I think also we, because we weren't expert survey makers, we asked a couple of questions that were, that didn't give us the right information. For instance, we asked the question, does the number of STRs affect your livability. And when I read that question, to me, the number was 17.5%. To other people, the number might have been 250. To other people, they had no idea what the number meant. They just answered, is my livability okay? So I think we asked the question in such a way that we don't really know what people meant when they answered it. So I think we should definitely take the survey into consideration, but I don't think it's a be all end all, because I don't think we asked the right questions.
I think that's totally fair. I think that's totally fair. I mean, we have to be very careful about being, taking actual numbers from these. We have to take them in perspective and look at trends. But
right.
The question I'm quoting is very specific. This is what it literally said. How do you feel about the current total number of STRs, 263?
Okay.
That's all I'm referencing.
Yeah. So it was the livability one that was iffy, and not that one. Okay, fair. Michael, you want to put out a number if it was a straight cap?
Well, yeah, and thanks, Patrick, for the clarification there. And that's kind of why I prompted that at the beginning of this meeting, because I wanted us to all go in it at the same time. I know in Deb's email, she had some numbers in there, and some of we're citing those, and but we have our report that we put out, and unfortunately, I was looking through all my folders to try to bring it up too, because I was curious what the short-term rental owner and manager sentiment was. I think we can expect it to be higher, but I don't think it was 90% either, right? It was something small. I don't know if you have that number in front of you. But yeah, I would say if they're saying, and that's why we kind of brainstormed this option B, and I know we're talking about option A, but that's why we brainstormed B, is because the thought is that reasonable plus there's capacity. Should we address livability concerns? And in addition to that, and I know I paused there because I know we're not trying to talk about the homes in the UGB, and I'm not trying to think of a policy to bring them in. I'm specifically speaking to the sentiment, and going back to the survey. But if people are saying that there's a reasonable amount right now, based on the impacts that they're seeing out their window, they're also saying there's a reasonable amount for these, is it 42 that are just, in the south area of town, just on the other, you could look out your window across the street, and that's outside of city limits, but there's short-term rentals there that all come in and use the amenities that we have here in town. Same with the 18th, 19th, 20th up there. They're all right there, and they all come through town. So we're witnessing those impacts, and yet people are still saying there's a reasonable amount. So if that number's, I feel like the number is 42. Is that correct? Can somebody fact check me on that real quick?
42 what? STRs in the UGB?
STRs. Yeah.
It sounds about right, but yeah, I don't have it in front of me.
So the number that I would propose for a fixed ceiling has a 3 in front of it. So I would say low 300s based on that. So math, 365 plus 42. Right. What do you want to say? 310? 305?
Okay. Somewhere around there. Cheryl?
Well, having lived, I don't want to digress here, but living by the UGB down by where I am, I don't think people are satisfied with the status quo down there. But I also think people are not aware of where these little pockets are in our community. They don't know the difference. And the neighbors down by me, which is down by that pocket, says, no, there's too many. It's just gotten crazy, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, back to option A, I think I was going to go with a numerical cap. And I think what we tried to do with our earlier discussions was manipulate that number a little bit to allow for growth. And probably we do need to do that, but I think that would be something we would be better informed at once we get into all these other considerations that we talked about that we're not going to do today. So I think I would hold it at 263, the current number.
Okay. Anupam, I know you don't want to do this, but if you have to.
If I had to, I think, I mean, again, going back to my comment about asterisks, if you say pick a number, recognizing it's going to be changed, I'd go with Michael 300.
Okay, Joe?
Did you say Carol or Jill?
Jill,
Me.
you,
I'd keep it at 263.
okay, Carol?
I would, okay, so going back to the various factors of this, I would also like to know more information. I would like to know if the 263 that we do have currently are being utilized as fully as they could be. I also think there's a huge difference between a number of STRs that have that allow 16 people versus an STR that allows 6 people. So the density of numbers of people within any one house is a huge factor. I know some homes only allow 2 people and no pets, and we haven't really looked at those individual factors.
I just added that
and
to our list of things we need to discuss, occupancy, you're right.
Yeah, and pets, you know, I'm still hearing that some STRs are having 6 dogs in one house and multiple cars that take over. The STR next to us has like 9 cars there at times.
Okay,
You know,
but
and
we will talk about the issues, but if we have a baseline to start with on a cap, what would you want that number to be?
I would keep it 265. I like that number.
Okay. I also I would keep it in the low 3s as well. So we're kind of half and half on this one, but somewhere between 265 and low 3s, I think is our starting number for that. On all these issues, if anybody from who's listening has a strong opinion one way or the other, would you raise your hand as we go along? And I mean, I think the more heads in this, the better, to a point.
So who were the ones that voted for the 300?
Michael.
I just thought 2. Oh, 3.
Michael,
okay, so
Anna
3
Palm, and me.
Okay, so 3 to
3 and
4.
4. Yeah.
Throw
Okay.
out one caveat.
And just to be clear, I mean, I went for the 300 because I have no idea, based on all the conversations, and Carol, you brought up a very good point about, is a 16-room STR the same as a 2-room STR?
Right.
And we should factor that in some way. So again, at some point, we're going to get to a conversation about is each STR the same? Or is it different? Does it get different rating? So I think those conversations will occur, and that will define the number at the end of the day. So anyway, that's.
I agree, Anupam. And the reason that I would pick low 3s instead of the 263 is that if there is, when you said 42, Michael, I thought you were talking about the new development that's finally going to get going on 3rd Street. That's going to be, as it is being put out to the Planning Commission, it's going to be 40, I think it's 41 or 42 small homes, kind of like the classic cottages, the 650 square foot home. And that's going to be right downtown, but not in the commercial zone. They're too early in the planning stage to know whether they will allow allow STRs or not. I mean, you can't even ask them that. They haven't even gotten to the Planning Commission yet. So there are things that will happen after we've made these decisions. I mean, that's just kind of how life works. We can make all the decisions we want, and then there could be a turnover in STRs, and suddenly all the STRs are 1-bedroom homes. I mean, it's not going to happen, but it could. So we can't factor in every possibility. We just have to come up with some basic concepts and work from there. Michael?
Yeah, and well, I don't know, Patrick I guess he's got his hand up too there, but so I just wanted to make a comment too. I mean, if we were to go with a number that we would see within a 20-year planning horizon, and I know this is just me doing some, some napkin math to calculate buildable lands. We were mid 300s, I think. There's probably a plus and minus 20, 30 in that calculation based on, lot size and whatnot. But so if we were to stick with the methodology and let the amount of buildable lands be the ceiling, which is what it is. I mean, people say that there's no limit right now. There is a limit. It's a constrained supply of land. And so that would probably land us in the mid 300s. And so if folks are feeling like, gosh, if you're saying 300, that feels like, high growth, we are trying to reel in that number back. And I would say based on the feedback from the survey to ground it in something that aligns more with community sentiment. So I just wanted to put that out there and explain a little why I landed at the number I did. So, thanks.
Patrick?
Yeah, just taking into account like Anupam's thoughts, Michael's thoughts about kind of all these like kind of X factors. I think they kind of fit in well with beginning with this base point. And I just want to put in a caveat on mine, like when I'm saying 263 to 265, which is kind of the current number, I'm thinking about this conceptually. Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Do we want STRs to go up? Do we want them to go down? Do we want them to remain relatively stable? I don't think anybody wants them to go down in this conversation because we want to protect the city, we want to protect the budget. So for me, I like where we are. To Michael's point, what that means to me is for the conversation we're having today, which is the city today, that is just, the city boundaries. So that's my 265. Layla has asked us to come up with a 5-year plan, 5 to 10-year plan. That's why I'm point to that number. Michael's bringing up the future, and beyond that 5 to 10-year plan, I would also want to have a UGA plan. We'll talk about that later, but I have one, and it also is based on, keeping that stable. So those numbers you're talking about, Michael, 265 is my current city number, and then I would have a number that would be based on stability in those ranges too. So
Yeah,
but that's just like we're just because we're picking a starting point. We have to start somewhere, and this is a great place to start it. And this is all about: do we want to go way? Do we want us to go way up? Do we want it to go way down? Do we want to keep it relatively stable? With kind of modest revenue growth. I'm in that final camp.
Cheryl, I'm gonna get you just a sec. Patrick, I'm just picking you because I think you might be able to do it. Can you get ready that at some point I can show those 3 graphs that I sent through emails to everybody on the committee, the showing the difference between the 3 concepts that we're talking about. You know what I'm talking about? The email I sent a couple days ago to everybody.
I'll take a look for it.
Okay. Does anybody else know what I'm talking about that can share? Michael, can you? At some point, I think it might be helpful to share screen to show in those graphs, there's really not much difference in what we're talking about. Cheryl, go ahead.
Well, so one of the questions I have or concerns I have is when we talk about buildable lands is, to me, then that's the assumption that we're going to utilize STRs equitably in all those buildable lands. And when we look at the data we have, we see that that's not the case. There are certain areas, obviously closer to the beach, that absorbs those higher STR numbers and percentiles. So that confuses me when we get above 300, because even though there might be homes, potential homes, they're away from the beach. And are we saying, oh, we're going to set up a system so that every neighborhood or zoning pocket has equitable or the same number of STRs? Or are we saying it's just this total number? And we know from past experience that it's going to heavily impact the beach area. So it's a disproportionate number to me.
So the policy could read really simply. It could read, and I think it's been in a couple of drafts of my emails there, but policy must be paired with density proximity. So we're talking about, and we'll define what that looks like, but it's a simple policy statement that it says that it must be implemented with XYZ policies to address exactly what you're saying. And when we could look at density, and Patrick will talk about that, I think today, there's the close density, the halo, there's proximity, which kind of ties into that. And then there's a neighborhood-based density. And so you can have something in this new, Highlands or whatever the development that gets brought in. And if they never, meet that, it doesn't mean that, that there's still those permits that are hanging out there, but they'll never be used because they're tied to that individual density of the neighborhood. At least was my vision for that. But we haven't gotten there yet. But I hope to address exactly what you're talking about, because I do think that that's a strong community concern.
And Cheryl's asking a much different question, I guess, than I've looked at it, and we need to discuss it. Her question is, should we say no area in town should be more than 17.5%, and if you want an STR, you might as well buy a house away from the beach because the beach is already over 17.5%. That kind of simplifying it, but there's a density that says the entire city nowhere shall be higher than this, and then there's the density that says this area will be 100%. This area will be 50%, this area will be 20%. So it's very different ways of looking density that we haven't gotten to yet. But we need to look at those different ways of looking at it.
Well, that's why I got back to where I think we should pick working numbers. That conversation with you is because until we hammer out those density, all those other issues, I mean, the working number could change based on what we come up in terms of what Michael just said. So, that's what I meant by just choosing these numbers, because we know, I personally think they're gonna morph and change a little bit as we hammer out this details and specifics around density. We look at the UGA, all those things. So, these are ballpark numbers to me to start our work with, because we may find out that it's too high or it's too low or it's just right. I don't know. But I think that it's going to be greatly impacted by those considerations.
Right. Linda?
Yeah, so I just want to kind of bring us back to focus. So remember what the council asked for. The council asked for policy options. So there, I agree with what Cheryl just said. We need to work with what policy do we want to present to the city council, and what are the options under those policies. I think numbers can come later, but I think right now it's how we consider it and what kind of policy options, because the council does not want one, they want the options. And I think we've had a lot of discussion that gets us close to that, but that's really what the council is asking for.
Okay. I want to get to option B, because I also want to get to Patrick's density thing. Option B says, let's have a percent, and whatever that percent is, but also have a cap, which acts for two reasons. One thing that a cap does, it's a future cap, but one thing that it does is say, should there be rampant growth, maybe we want to do a freeze, basically what we did 2 years ago, because there was 40 homes built that year, and it was like the feeling was, geez, we need to do something here. Let's just put a freeze and figure out what we want to do. So what it does is put a cap, a future cap, and my suggestion was 1% of current homes are 14. Michael has a different number, which we want to hear also. But so what my suggestion is 17.5%. So if there is no big home growth, it would just continue on as it has been for all those years. But should there be rapid home growth, as soon as there were 14 more STRs than there are at the 17.5%, that would trigger a review by the STR committee and by council to say, do we want to continue the same way, or do we want to do something else again? Do we have another policy? And that might be in 3 years, that might be in 5 years. If you look at the historical average of SDRs at 2.5 a year, 2.5 more a year, it would be between 5 and 10 years. So that's option B, is to have it grow at 1%, and I'm suggesting 17.5, but with a cap, and I'm suggesting 1% of current homes. So my numbers for option B would be 256, which is the current number, with a cap of 270, which would trigger a temporary freeze while the committee and the council consider what they want to do from there. So anybody else want to start with what, if it was option B, what you would like to see the numbers as?
Joe, do you mind giving us your opinion, just to give us a guidance of what you're thinking?
Why I'm thinking?
No, I'm trying to figure out, are you going to give us a percentage or a number? If you can maybe lead, it'll help us maybe get our answers in your vein.
Okay, thought I did, but I'll do it again. My number is have it grow at 17.5%. The starting number, therefore, would be 256, which means there would be a waiting list and some attrition until we got to 256 from the current 263. Then we continue to grow at 17.5% until we reach 270 SDRs, which is our current number of homes, 1421 times 1%. The reason I chose 1% is that's what Tillamook County chose as. Tillamook County is doing straight caps everywhere. So in Neocony, they're doing a straight cap of 1% over the current rate, which was 21%. So now Neocony is 22%. But they're not going to grow at 22%. It's 84 home STRs. So they will stay at 84 homes, which is 22% of current homes. So my numbers are, I'll say it one more time, 17.5%, which is 256, and it continues to grow until there are 270 STRs, and at that point it would trigger a freeze and a review by the committee and by council. Anybody ready to spit it out?
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Anupam.
I'm sorry, I jumped in. It's fine with me, Joe, what you propose, so I'm good.
Okay. Right.
Me too.
So, and I think that maybe the short answer is, well, I think option B, both as a mechanism and as a final cap, makes a lot of sense based on what we've heard, again, from the survey, what we heard from the PowerPoint presentation from city staff. It goes a long way of getting this there. And the other thing that I like about this particular policy is that it sets policy trajectory. I know he said 3 years or 5 years, but policy that guides the city is typically much longer staying power than that. And so I'd rather have a policy that has a lengthy arc to it, but has maybe a stopgap or an intermediate ceiling, like an artificial ceiling or constrained ceiling, I'm trying to think the words we use, that sunsets after 3 years, to where we re-examine, we reevaluate whether it's another survey or budget considerations, or if there's new policy from the comp plan that would help inform different policy, but it keeps that arc, that trajectory that we've been on since the original 17.5% has happened. So, but in reaction to the sentiment, I put out the number that was a little over 300 earlier for a hard cap. And if we were to have a constrained ceiling that is less than the availability of buildable lands, so less than the 360 or 350, whatever it is, it makes sense. Again, my reasoning is to account for the homes that are just outside city limits. And in my formula that I had there, I had 10%. I could be swayed one way or another on it, but I threw out a number that we need to have some type of X there, some type of variable to account for us addressing these livability challenges that people interact with. And assuming that we are making headway with code enforcement officer and other policy to address those. You know, if we all lived next to happy STR, then we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And maybe then we wouldn't be talking about a limit lower than 360 over a 20-year planning horizon. So that's where I'm landing at. You know, if we're, I was thinking low 300s, 320 would be the ceiling for this policy. That's kind of where I would think that, and that number would, you know, that would sunset after a 3-year evaluation period, and where they do another survey, look at budget. It align with some existing periodic review or budget cycle, something to where it aligns with that. It gives the city enough time to have focus for other things. But
Michael, would you have that 3-year review, even if the number after 3 years was 265? Or would you only do if it was over 300 something?
I think it's worth, I think there should be a standing thing as part of the policy recommendation that there's a reevaluation that occurs periodic, and that it should be tied to something else. It makes sense that it's tied to some other evaluation process that the city has, so that they can, at that time, it's just a health check. And so the process that we're doing today is such a big lift, and we've all put in a tremendous amount of effort on this. When we talk about reevaluating this policy in 3 to 5 years, I don't envision that. I think we have a pretty solid survey that could use some tweaks, and it would be great to be able to compare apples to apples. When we do go back out for another survey 3 to 5 years from now, I think that we have we can land on a really strong policy framework as a core, and that anything that we do on top of that are things that we can tweak. And so I don't envision this being a big weighty process. It's just kind of a health check. And who knows, if community sentiment is great, maybe we leave it as is with that incremental growth. If there's still a lot of problems, then we can, you know, maybe retool it more at that time. But that was the thought process with B. So, and that number that I landed on.
Cheryl?
I'm good with the 17.5% with the 1% stopgap.
Okay, Jill?
I'm also in favor of that.
Great, thanks, Phil. Jill?
So you would propose 17.5%,
Which is
that goes up to
256.
270,
Yeah,
56% that goes up to, I'm okay with that.
Okay, Carol?
I'm okay with that also, with the stopgap. But I also wanted to just add that there's several things that are going to happen here in the next few years that are going to affect our town. One is the workforce housing. The other is the project on 3rd Street, the 42 homes that are going in. The other one is the hotel that's being built on Classic. That and also I've heard that the number of camp spots in the campground is going to double. So I think having a stopgap is really important so that it doesn't get out of hand, and that we are sure that the city can support the number of tourists that are going to be coming in.
Okay. Thanks. Yes, that will affect tourists. The housing, the way it currently is set up, it cannot be used for short-term rentals. Just as, but it would still be more people.
It would still be in the count, though. It would still be in the count, and having enough. Oh, it wouldn't be in the count of homes available. They would be
Well,
apartments.
maybe
They
it
would
would,
be,
yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
I believe it was deed, they proposed it being deed restricted. It was my
Yeah.
understanding. I think I just
But,
rewatched
but,
it last week.
but Carol is right. We should take a look at, does that mean,
I agree.
should we include that in the count of available?
count, correct.
It's the same with
Or take it out.
apartments. Yeah, it's the same with apartments that Anupam asked about. If you have a 4-unit apartment building, because we have a restriction that you can only have one. If you have a deed to a property, you can only have one STR in you can't have more than 2 STRs, or you can't have more than 1 STR. So if you own an
Okay.
apartment building that has 4 units, only one of them could be an STR. But still, it's 4
Correct.
units.
Yeah.
It adds 4 housing units. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else on the that I missed on the option B? Okay, good. All right. So we have starting numbers. There's starting numbers. We got a lot of work to do. We still need to talk about some of those things that Carol brought up. There will be more housing units, and how do we address those? I'm going to add the workforce housing to that conversation. We've also got the HOAs, the UGBs, the grandfathered, and the occupancy. Anything else that should be added to that list that we need to get our heads around? ADUs, that's correct. Phil, am I correct that the Planning Commission, when they were talking about ADUs a couple years ago, we're going to recommend to the city that ADUs could not be used as STRs?
That was talked about. I don't recall offhand what we came up with, but I think the idea was that the ADUs were directed to solve a particular housing problem and they could not be converted to STRs.
I think so too, but could you double check on that for us? And the other question is an ADU a housing unit? Does that count in the, we've had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how many housing units are in Manzanita, because there's so many different ways to count it.
Currently, we don't have any ADUs that
Correct.
are being recognized in the count, so that's an undetermined factor.
Yeah, but if and when we do, will they be separate housing units? I don't know the answer to that.
So,
Patrick.
so when we do all this and we present our numbers and our policy ideas to Linda and everyone, it might be worth maybe just putting forth this little thing to say, you know, let's keep the process consistent with prior decades, and we should not include commercial buildings, which includes apartments, and we should not include ADUs in the future counts, just to keep it consistent. And we can talk about that in, you know, this next stages and just see if something like that makes sense to add, and we can add to that or subtract to it depending on what you all think. But yeah, let's include that with it just to make sure that we have simplicity and clarity.
Okay. Anything else on these? Anything from the public? Okay. Michael, were you able to find that chart?
Yeah. Let's see. You want me to screen share?
I just want to show those 3 graphs because they just, do you have ability to share?
I don't. I was going to ask Linda or whoever's.
Linda's the host now, I think.
I was not made the host. Nina, are you on? Could you make me the host?
Or just
While we're
allow.
waiting, it looks like Deb has a question.
Go ahead, Deb.
or a comment.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
I'll follow up on that.
Thanks, everybody.
Sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
So it's been a lot of work, I know. You guys have done a lot of work already. But I do kind of see it a little bit backwards of how can you guys all agreed on everybody else's numbers, but you really didn't move ahead on any kind of conversation. You know, so for instance, I know Cheryl said last month when it was said that the fixed number would be released all at once, then the question was, well, no, if the number became higher than the current 263, 265 number. I also, there was a question in almost every meeting that the increase in revenue would happen every year. Patrick, I believe you were the one who talked about prices go up every year. So I had the question of for the STR owners that are on the committee, do you raise your prices every year? How much do you raise your price every year? How do you determine that? And also, given the fixed number, you're restricting competition. So how would that impact your business going forward? So that's for the STR owners. Thank you.
Michael, Jill, you want to start?
I want to ask Deb first before any of you answer. It's not a what are you looking for in the answer? What are you trying to get to? Because I think that'll help them answer.
The question had been raised that the revenue would continue for the city. And so, and Patrick has said in his defense of the option A was that the STR owners raised their prices every year. And so my question is, well, do you raise it every year? How much do you raise it every year? How do you know everybody who's an STR owner raises their prices every year? So the question about the financing piece of how it adds to the city budget.
Well, why don't I'll get started since there's silence. First, the idea of rent increasing every year, I think it may not be house to house, but collectively, it appears that that is the case based on revenue that has been coming into the city. So I would imagine there are houses that maybe keep it the same. There's that. Number two, I'll say this for me, and from what I've seen so we've done surveys, we've done our city survey, but we've also done STR surveys from communities from Longview, Washington down to Coos Bay. So we've interacted with all the different communities that have and monitor short-term rentals. And the idea that if we cap short-term rentals in Manzanita, that we have some sort of a competitive advantage as short-term rental owners, and we have reduced supply, which supposedly would increase demand and allow us to make more money or something like that. I would just say this: the idea that capping in a city is not going to impact our ability to change prices in that city, because we're competing against all the various communities above and below us. So even whether we cap it or another community caps it, if somebody comes in through Airbnb or VRBO, they're going to look at a house, and if it's too expensive, like if I think I can raise my prices, 20% because we've got a cap, I will be the fool, because that price increase just turns somebody away to another city and goes somewhere else. So the idea that the capping here in this micro area is going to allow us to change prices, I'm not sure that's the case. We have to go with the market of the North Coast. And then finally, I'll say this: regardless of the percentage that each house increases on an annual basis, we have to deal with one reality that we really have not talked about much, but there's probably going to be, over the next 5, 10, 15 years, there's going to be movement from the owners. According to the survey, a third of short-term rentals are owned locally. They're owned by mom and pop shops. They're not owned by the big property management companies. But I'll say this, having talked to a lot of folks who...
Patrick, they're not managed
Correct.
by.
They're not managed by, rather. But I'll tell you this, from talking to people who have recently, since the pandemic and later, transitioned from doing it themselves to moving over to a place. And I want to be real careful with how I share this, because we have a couple local entities that do a really nice job. Daniel knows what I'm talking about. When we're talking about corporate entities that are going to be acting as property management companies, the minute you transition from us to them, the usage on that house goes way up, right? So over time, as we get squeezed out as owners because the prices are, the fees are too high, the process is too complicated, these 263 to 265 homes are going to bring in more money for the city, because the minute you put them over to corporate management, they don't want it at 100 days per year like I might like it, but they love it at 300. So, you know, there is a natural progression going, whether we keep it up at 263, 265 or not. It's gonna go up.
Michael?
Sorry, multitasking there. Trying to share my screen.
Oh, sorry.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, so yeah, we're going in year 3 now, and they have gone up a little bit. You know, what is that percentage? You know, maybe 5-10% gone up. Primarily, that's been for fees and you know, our services, the housekeeping that we use has gone way up, and so that kind of helps account for that. I don't know. Is that kind of the simple answer there?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm getting at the big picture question though, but I mean, it was just a direct response.
Jill? I'm
yeah.
sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I just wanted to, yeah. Jill? Have you raised your rates every year or every once in a while?
I don't necessarily raise my rates every year, but you have to take into account what we're paying. And obviously housekeeping has gone up. You know, the one-time fee has gone up, for, you know, the fees from the city has gone up substantially. I, you know, factor all that in and what the market will bear and just act accordingly.
Thanks. Thomas, you had a question. Tom Campbell?
Hi there. So I have a short-term rental and it's managed by Sunset to Sunset. And they have an algorithm that they use to determine price based on their perceived demand and season and weekends versus weekdays, that take all these different things into consideration. The months of January, February, and March were really dead months. And so they came to me and asked me to reduce my rates to try to lure some people in. Their thinking right now is that a lot of people that might otherwise be coming here have decided to start expanding their travel to more exotic places now that they feel comfortable that COVID's not going to get them, or isn't going to get them as severely as was once feared at the beginning of the pandemic. So we've had to reduce our rate.
You reduce, okay. Michael Gardner?
I was actually just going to say almost exactly what Thomas just said. We use a local rental company with our short-term rental, and they use dynamic pricing that tries to fit the market. And so there's not a whole lot of individual control over that, unless, as Thomas said, they come to you and ask you to kind of cut the bottom out of it. And also, as he mentioned, late December all the way through March has been just totally dead. We've actually had 0 rentals during that period of time. And so a lot of it just is driven by the market. And the costs in Manzanita have risen substantially. And I think we are seeing a lot more competition from surrounding areas, as Patrick kind of laid out as well. That's all I wanted to add, basically adding on to what the other people are saying.
Thanks, Michael. Deb, did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. I think, well, there's several factors about where you guys are going. I mean, I don't know how you come to an end result, without speaking about all the components that make up that end result of a number that some of you have talked about. So how do HOAs play in? How do ADUs play into the future? And to Michael Garner's point, to Michael's Duncan's point is that I think you do have a natural boundary, right? Because you have so many houses. You had in the last 10 years, you had 2 years that were out of sync with number of homes. But if you look at the last 10 years, you basically had 3 new licenses come in a year, if you averaged it out. You had those 2 years of 21 and 22 that were crazy. But the 3 years prior to that, 18, 19, and 20, you had just a handful of houses get built. In 2023, you had back to 12. I think 2024 is kind of looking like a small growth year so far.
Except for the 40 on 3rd Street.
Well, it's not built, right?
Right.
It's taken them a long time. That land's been sitting there well over a year now, almost 2 years. And I also think that you've got a problem in the case of there'll probably be HOA with a restriction. So how do you bring those in?
All I can say, Deb, is stay tuned. Because
I think the thing is,
I think we've all agreed. We agree. We've got to now talk about all those things. And that's we need to talk more often. We can't just again talk 3 days before our next meeting. So let's get on it. I guess to all of you, let's get on it and start talking about all these things. I think one of the most important ones are densities and HOAs, but we've got to talk about all of them. And as Linda said, just going back to what Linda said, we're just suggesting policy. And now let's look at the policy, because policies are what should the city do about density? What should the city do about HOA count? That's policies. But the other policy, and I'm going to disagree with Deb on this. I think we have done something today. We need to give a policy of here are 3 options, and here are numbers that go with it. So if you look at the chart that just came up, the growth, the stagnant, and the average, these are the blue line is just having a cap of 263. That would be option A. The gray line is having no cap, just having it grow at 17.5%. And the orange line, which you only see with large growth of homes, is the 270 cap. The reason that you only see the orange line in the first chart, the growth chart, is that if there isn't massive growth, like Deb feels there won't be, then either stagnant or average, gray, which is the 17.5%, and orange, which is the 17.5% with the 1% cap, is exactly the same. They're the same numbers. Even with growth, and this was, I was growing at, I can't remember, let me find my number here. I was growing at 20, 30, 40, and 35 homes a year. Even with that, if you look at the first chart, the growth, again, we're not suggesting to the council that they do anything crazy or anything that has not been kind of historically done. We're trying to stay within the same parameters, all of us, no matter what option we're looking at. And we did that. We kind of confirmed that today. Let's stay within kind of what we've been doing, but with some differences. So give them some options of some different ways to handle the future. Any questions on this chart? And I can't see you, so just ask your questions.
Well, Joe, I just wanted to comment, and I think this is great because it all kind of ties in with the conversation that we've had over the last 10 minutes or so, is that, it's straight line growth we're talking about, and you're always going to have booms and busts. It's like do you sell during the dips in the stock market? No, you lose everything. So you hang in there, and over 20 years, you hope they go up. I mean, we're talking about trend lines here. Same thing as if you would have done traffic analysis during the pandemic. There's no cars out on the road. So yes, we're going to see big booms, but historic trends through all these cycles that we've seen before, when interest rates are lower, whatever's, economy's good, you might see more SDRs, you might see more revenue, all that. But on when you look at a growth graph over time, we're not talking about earth-shattering numbers here, especially when you're planning over a 20-year planning horizon for your community.
Anupam, I can see you have your hand raised.
Oh, thank you. I was just, unfortunately, I might have to leave a few minutes before noon, and I was really interested in Patrick's presentation.
Okay, yeah,
but
I would like to get to that as well.
So
let's get to that. Get it, Patrick.
I'll share my screen. I think I'm disabled by the host.
You are, just a minute, it's coming.
Also, while you're doing that, real quickly, in June, 3 of your terms are up. And that would be an at-large position, which is Patrick, the non-STR owner with less than 3 homes, or more than, no, let me get this right. It's Patrick, the at-large position. It's Jill, is that correct, Jill? You had a 2 term?
I thought so, and then it says something different on the website.
Yeah, it's the website is incorrect. Jill's position was a STR self-managed owner, and Carol, whose position is non-STR owner with 4 or more homes around her or him. So those 3 positions are up for renewal. You can reapply. The council just at their last meeting set a committee to work on the criteria and then questions for the applicants. So that'll be happening in April, right, Linda? The applications?
The applications will be April, and the interviews, the selection will be in May.
Okay. Okay, Patrick, you're on.
Almost there. Just trying to get the screen share out.
So you
Okay,
should...
I am going to let people know that I am not planning on reapplying. Just, just so you know ahead of time. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
That's good. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah.
I am almost there. I'm sorry. Thank you for your patience. Go ahead and fill
the time you can get up there.
I don't know why this is not allowing this to work. So
I had to change all my permissions on my computer to get it to let me do it. That was part of it. I don't know if you're encountering the same thing.
All right, so for discussion in the next few weeks leading up to next month, I've got apartments, HOAs, UGBs, ADUs, grandfathered STRs, and occupancy. Anything else anybody can think of we need to talk about? Wouldn't it be, and density. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get them all resolved? I don't think we can, but we've got a couple months to do it, so.
Joe, read that list again.
Apartments, HOAs, UGBs, ADUs, grandfathered STRs, occupancy, and density. Simple.
I'm also really interested in knowing where our problem houses are, if we have any. And I know we were gonna follow up with that with Max, but to start identifying where those problem houses are, if they
And
are
Carol,
in
I believe what
existence.
Max said last month was currently he does not have a list of problem houses, that he hasn't, since he's started, he hasn't had multiple complaints on a house.
Okay.
I also think
So-
probably you'll see that more in summer, perhaps.
Absolutely.
You know, season picks up rather than now,
Mm.
Karen, maybe. Mm.
Okay.
So here we go. If you have any questions along the way, let me know. I think this is our first kind of movement now into addressing the big picture. And this is where kind of setting up kind of boundaries in the beginning, setting up kind of concepts about whether we're going up, kind of trying to stay stable, go down. It all comes together here because this is the place where all the plans begin to merge. And what we're going to talk about here a little bit is kind of the concept of neighborhood limits with what we've talked, and with the understanding now that we will have some sort of a city backstop behind us in terms of these limits that we talked about earlier today. So the things we talked about earlier today are overall city. No matter what happens in a neighborhood, no matter how big it gets in the neighborhood, we have a upper limit citywide. Within these neighborhoods, we want to create a system potentially to allow us to deal with density neighborhood by neighborhood. So just using a big picture as a map, conceptually, we can come up with any neighborhoods we want. These are neighborhoods set up, for building purposes, but these are also aligned with how we did the survey. There aren't many, and I'm just going to tell you what I saw in the 250 miles that we surveyed. Most people use neighborhood density concepts to reduce short-term rentals, and most of them put 0. So there were 2 that I found, or there were a couple that I found that used actual percentages for neighborhoods. Just using Seaside as an example, they did it, and they did it in bands. So bands along the coast, and they were higher, closer in because you could make more money on those, and they got lower as you went out.
Patrick,
just conceptually,
can you give a, for instance, of that, like with Seaside?
Yeah, so here's how Seaside would do it. Let's imagine if you're looking at this coastal zone, which we call North Coast and South Coast. So in Seaside, this would be a 100% zone, which is exactly similar to what we have in the Lanita corridor. A 100% zone means 100. If you want an STR, you can put it anywhere you want. You can put it in 100% of the spaces. As they went further out of the end, they had a 0% zone, and that's what a lot of other cities have. A 0% zone means you can't have a single STR in there. We're not talking about that. So what we're talking about is, what do you do? Seaside has a 50% zone, and they have a 30% zone in between the all or nothing zones. And just to give you a conceptual, just give you kind of an idea of how that might work. Michael and I talked a little bit about this. What does this really mean? How do you do it? There's really 2 ways to do it. And the one way, the reality is this: the process we've always had hasn't really been a citywide cap because we haven't been doing it citywide. We had really 2 neighborhood caps. We had a 100% cap in the Lanita corridor, and we had basically one massive 17.5% neighborhood. What we can do is break these down into other neighborhoods and assess them separately. There's 2 ways to do it. One is the way we've always done it, and you just basically keep track of the entire number of short-term rentals in the neighborhood and the entire number of houses, and over time you make sure that it stays within that range. What other towns do what other towns do is they set their range, and I've got some examples here, kind of in the Seaside mode, but they create a halo. And they measure to a halo. So I actually took this from our map. Here's the beach here. This is kind of south of us. So yeah, the beach on one side, and you actually have the state park on the other. But this is to give you conceptually what they do. And you pick a house and you go, this is at the city level. This is the control. The city goes, well, is this a dense zone or not? And the way they do that is they go, here's this house. And if you look at it kind of on a map, the new short-term rental ends up in the middle, and this represents a 100-foot halo. And what do I mean by that? So so if you like pictures, we put it here. If you like kind of like numberish maps, we put the same thing here. And what this really breaks down to is this. Here's your house, and you have your two neighbors on one side, these two houses and these two houses. And you have, so that's a row of 5 houses, fits into 100 feet this way and 100 feet this way, because a standard lot is 50 feet wide and 100 feet long. And if you do this halo around this in 100 feet, you touch the two houses left and right, and you go across the street. Here's the street, and you have 5 homes across the street. And you typically have 5 homes in the backyard homes. So you typically, if you have all filled lots, that means 5 behind, 5 across the street, and 4 in your row, and 2 to the left and 2 to the right. So just big picture that, if you did it and all these are filled, you could have 14 houses within a 100-foot halo typically. Any questions there?
So are you getting to, if this star home wants to be an STR, what happens?
Yes, but I just want to go slow because
Okay.
I just want to go step by step just to make sure I don't lose anybody in the early stages. Is there any questions about that, or just conceptually, how do we, the halo begins with the new short-term rental. We're assessing, is this area dense or not based on how it is. So to do that, to calculate a density halo, you basically, using this map, you kind of go within this halo and you figure out, well, how many houses are there? And if you count, you'll note there's an empty lot here. So we have an empty point here, and we have an empty lot here. So we have an empty point here. So if you count these up around your applicant for a short-term rental, in blue, we've counted 12 houses. Okay. So if you have a 50% area, if you have a standard house, that would mean 7. If there are 7, that's okay, and you can be the next STR. If you have 12 in this example, you can have 6. And at a 50% range, and you would get an STR license. If you're over these numbers, you won't get an STR license. So conceptually, that's how that works. And just to dig a little deeper, what does that even mean? Let's use 30% as an example. If you have 14 houses, let's just go to this map. We have 12 houses that we've counted. So 3 is okay. Why is 3 okay? Because with 3 short-term rentals and 12 houses, 3 divided by 12 equals 25%. We're assuming this is a 30% area. So 3 is okay, that's green, it's less than 30%. 4, that's too many because it goes to 33% and it goes over. So this is our first touch at this. This is super heady stuff, or at least it's a little complicated, but it's the first step to us beginning the process of going, there are 2 main ways to do density. Here's one of them. Here's how it works. We don't have to do this. All 600 of us in the area or more don't have to do this, but you'd have a group in the city. Everybody would work with the city. We can share resources from other places. And basically, these are how you can. We have a map of short-term rentals. So in this, you have a map to the right, and it would show how many there are, and it would show whether you're over 30% or over 40, or over 30%. If that's the range you chose, you can choose 50%, you can choose 25, you can choose 75, whatever. These are things, to everybody's point that's spoken today, from Anupam to Michael to Deb to everybody. These are things that can take some time. These are policy issues that should take some thought. And these are ones that we aren't necessarily going to come up with a number today or in the short term, but these are things that are tools that can be used to contain density. And these are the methods that peer cities have used to measure and contain. So you've got this concept, which is basically house specific. And you've got the concept we've always used, which is kind of region specific, and just and my final 2 cents is this: there's a reason why you don't see this in a lot of communities. This can be a lot of work, and it's not, it's going to be work for the city. I think whatever happens, simplicity is the key, because somebody has to do the counting and do the oversight on these things. So, any questions, or how many questions?
I want to just add for a second before the questions. You talked to another city that does this using the software that Brian Sent has showed us last month.
So Clatsop County has a software. It's a GIS team. They said probably Tillamook County. Well, they said contact the GIS county if we decide to do this. They have that too. And what that means is it's actually kind of simplifies the process. What they do is they know that this is an address. They pop in this address into the GIS system, and the GIS system kicks out basically this. So we manually counted that there's 12. We manually counted that there's 12, but the GIS system automatically just pops out the 12 addresses that are within that halo. And so it actually, with the GIS technology that is at the Clatsop County level, it's actually pretty straightforward. The counting, the only, the address is given to us. GIS kicks out the number of addresses, and all we have to do is double check against our STR map to go how many are in that same area.
Manzanita also owns a GIS license that they use for water meters, but do not currently use for STRs. So just something to know. Questions? Carol, I think you're first.
Go ahead and speak up.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is basically, can halos overlap? That's the first question. So could you have
process, in the process that I've seen, they cannot overlap, and the reason they can't overlap is because conceptually you base it on an application for a new license. So that's what this star represents. There's only one application that you're checking to see if they're in a dense area or not. So you're really
Patrick,
only creating
I think
one
she's
halo.
asking a different question. If, for instance, that star was to the house across the street. Okay. Move that star to the house across the street. Just put your arrow there for a second.
So I have an example of that. So this example, there are 12 houses. But let's say you went to here and the state park is here, or you went to here and there's a beach. Okay, so in that example, right here, where you have this area, your halo, when you look at the halo, it actually only, half of the halo is in the state park. There are no houses here. So the rest of the halo goes to here. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 houses. 1, 2, 3, 4 houses within that halo. So in these examples we're using, there's this is the blue. We have 4 houses in our halo, so 2 are okay. If 2 are short-term rentals are there at 50%, you're okay. You can only have 1 at 30%. You can only have 1 short-term rental near you. If you have 2, you don't get a license. And I'll just say this, something to think about for everybody, especially those who are really concerned about revenue over time. In our high grossing areas near the beach, we want to think about this number, because if we're going to create a number in a lower range and if let's assume this house was right here on the beach, this house probably makes 2 or 3 times as much as a house, several blocks back from the city. So if we can only allow 1 in this range at 30%, we have to think about, is 30% a good number or not?
Carol, the answer to your question is yes, they overlap. They overlap all over the place because
they can overlap.
It's circled.
So the second part of the question is, Patrick, did you think through whether the Manzanita city could, if we implemented a halo kind of thing, could we still have the same number of STRs, or would that by nature just limit the number of STRs?
That's a great question. And like I said, this is why I think it's easier to set a citywide cap than it is to do neighborhood caps. And I think we need to I think it's useful. I think this is a great idea that we should explore. But we have to be cautious because like I said, most cities use this tool to reduce short-term rentals. So we want to go at this in a smart and measured pace to make sure that we have at least stability or greater. in terms of the numbers.
Anupam?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. This is fascinating. I would like to spend more time on it. Unfortunately, wish we had more time right now. Just a quick question. Do you know if any city has put on this Halo concept on existing, let's say, neighborhood areas? And if so, what have they done with, let's say, if there were more STRs than the density limits would allow?
Right. So there are multiple communities that use this. Most huge amount use 0% as their number, and it's a way they're using this to keep short-term rentals out of neighborhoods. To your point, so let's say you have a number. Let's say we pick 10%. What that means in practice is that you really can't have a new short-term rental in that area until that percentage dips below 10%, on that particular street or around that particular house. So what that means is you don't have, in these neighborhoods, you don't have short-term rentals until attrition, all these houses sell, and as they sell, they get rid of their short-term rental licenses, and through attrition, you get down to 10% on that particular neighborhood.
Have any of them put in some kind of term limit that says, you know what, we will renew licenses or grant licenses for 5 years or 3 years or whatever period of time, and it may or may not get renewed?
The ones that I have seen that have tried to do something to reduce the number of short-term rentals, all the ones that I've seen to date that I've looked up, and that includes Lincoln City, that I think went from 800 to 200. They've done it only through attrition. Any place that had tried to do it and say you now can't renew your short-term license have run into some land use issues and been shot down in court. So I think only through attrition in the ones that have done it, definitely in this area, but also other areas.
Okay, thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So one, I think, yeah, this is great. This is great. It makes a lot of sense. I think it can be relatively straightforward and easy to implement with GIS software. You might be able to even integrate the tool of this into a web map to where the public can use too, just as a quick check. Gosh, it feels like there's a lot in my area. They put in their address and they can see. Because there's spatial tools that can now be embedded into Esri's web maps. So pretty straightforward. I think this is great. I do think, so the other two thoughts I have on this is, one, I'd like to see this methodology used like now to see how, the buffer applied to each of the STRs now. Just to see how many it's captured, and just kind of like if we were to do that process, because basically you plunk it down, you do your buffer, and then you do a capture of the data, spatial data within that buffer, and it's seconds for somebody to do I don't know who at the city staff would be doing that.
Brian is willing. Brian, I believe, is willing to and has some of those numbers for us now. So I think we have, because I don't think we can. You're absolutely right. If we want to come up with a suggested numbers, we need to know what it is now.
What it feels like, right? What it feels like.
Now.
And right. So that would be really helpful. When we get back to what is the control total, I think it can be all three, right? You can have a percentage overall that guides the number, a ceiling in your community. You can have neighborhood specific ones, right? Because when we break down the survey results, there's obviously neighborhoods up on the hill. Their threshold for how many short-term rentals and how much they impact their livability is a lot lower than somebody who's on the busy, vibrant hub of the beach in Laneta there, and they're okay with it. They're like, hey, this is why I live here, because I love that, right? So I think that you can have all three of those, right? Citywide, neighborhood, and like site specific buffer, proximity density buffers here. And the last thing I just on the point of I know it's a little bit off topic, but the idea of term limits or something to deal with attrition. I just put out like I have two people that live by me that have been using short-term rentals for decades for them to be part of this community. It's their way of getting their foot in the door. And I think too, there's a lot of folks in the community that got their $200,000-300,000 home in Manzanita and then pulled that ladder up, right? And then thanks for interest, but we're full type of thing now. And so I think it's important that we still have tools for people that don't have $1.2 million to plunk on a home here, to have a tool and a resource to be part of our community and to be part of that community for decades. So I just want to put that out there.
Jill?
Oh, I'm not. I had a question, Patrick. You may have answered this in part, but are there any coastal communities that have used this method? And if so, did you get any feedback from them? And you did say that everybody you found was using it for zero implementation of.
Most people use it to create a 0% zone. Seaside was the one that used this the most. They have a 100, 50, 30, and 0 zone, 4 zones. And another town I found did an 80% zone. So this we would be if and when we implement this for density, we would be one of two primary area neighborhoods using or cities using it. It's it takes some thought like to create it. Like it took me a while to get my arms wrapped around it. You'd want to work with the people in the city who would be a part of monitoring it and make sure it's something that they're comfortable with. Like you'd want this to be a joint partnership, because an idea doesn't matter if you can't implement it and it's not easy to do on a day-to-day basis. So lofty ideas are great, but if you can't do it at the city level, then that's something to consider. But and maybe that's a reason why you don't see it in a lot of places, because it's easier to just have a citywide.
Yeah,
It's easy to have a citywide captain in a neighborhood.
Let me just tie into that a little bit. I like this, and I think I think we could figure out how to make it workable and easy for the city, but it's one method. There are lots of other methods. As Patrick said, we could go 1% for this North Beach area, a different percentage for the SSR zone. Is it a different percentage for the Island zone? Whatever. We can do whatever. We can suggest whatever we think makes sense to us. So this is one method. I encourage all of you to come up with other methods you think might work better. And then once we have the methods, we also have to figure out what percents are we suggesting. There's a lot of moving parts, but I think this is a really easy way to look at it. Michael Gardner.
I just had a quick general overview question. What exactly is the point or the issue or the problem that the committee, and I guess ultimately the city, is trying to address with area density? I understood the survey that didn't really bear out the academic thought that there were more problems in more dense areas, that the beach area, as an example, had fewer complaints about short-term rentals than other areas. So I'm just wondering, and obviously this brings a lot of liability to the city when you start to deal with individual homeowner rights and what they can do with their property. So I just backing up and asking a big general question is, what is the problem that this is trying to address?
Cheryl, can you answer that?
Oh, yeah.
Cheryl lives in a dense area, and I think
Yeah, I can address that. I think what happens with a citywide percentile is you have a disproportionate number of STRs clustered in certain areas. And so you have a street, like near me, I was just looking at the map, where there are 6 houses in a row on one side of the street that are STRs. And so the people on the other side, who 3 of those people are full-time folks, it's a lot for them. So when you were talking about how this would work, I think I like it, but I think what we're trying to get at the question asked is, how do we make sure that if we have a citywide percentile or cap, that there's some distribution around so that we can maintain the quality of the neighborhood, so people who feel like they have a neighborhood versus the issues that come with an STR. And even if there isn't what we call a problem house, when you have 6 houses in a row and they're close to the beach and they're large homes, you have a number of people there. So every house has 2 to 3 cars. So just in the normal course of going and comings, there's just a lot happening that perhaps homeowners didn't buy into when they bought their properties. And these are people who've had homes a while, so they were there. So that's my issue on density, is how do we all get the benefits, and we all have agreed that we support the cities. This has brought us a lot, the revenue from short-term rentals, but there has to be a way so that it's a citywide responsibility for this too, not just a particular neighborhood or street.
Michael, also to answer your question, yes, the survey did not seem to bear out that the people in the highly dense areas felt more affected in terms of livability than people in the less dense areas. However, there are some very strident voices and some very valid, I think, points that even though the survey doesn't say that the majority of people who live, for instance, where Cheryl lives, feel their livability is terribly affected. There are quite a few people who do feel that, and if we can do something that doesn't impact the city greatly in terms of revenue and doesn't step on people's property rights, then we should try to do that. I guess that's my answer.
I also want to note that when we look at what the survey, and I think it was good, when we look at it by neighborhood, my neighborhood, which is South Beach, that's a large neighborhood.
Right.
So when we say, oh, the people in South Beach, I mean, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of blocks. I mean, it's one of the largest ones that we're looking at. So this was an effort when we were drilling down, when we knew there were people who had specific concerns, it brought to our attention that it was more localized than just the neighborhood per se.
It also came from the city council, who said, look at density.
And as we go through this process, I would say, I think Michael brings up some great points, and I think those are all things we're going to consider. I just want to say thanks to everyone who's from the community who's kind of reached out today and spoken up, because the things you're saying do matter. We are hearing you and listening to you on those things. And so to your point, Michael, I think there's 2 potentially conflicting messages that came from the survey. And, one is in these areas where Cheryl's describing, where we make the most amount of our money from the city is near the beach. Those are our most dense zones. And, the survey says, are you dissatisfied with this? Is this awful for you? And basically in those areas, there were less than 20% of people who were saying, this is awful for me overall. But in the survey, a second question said, would you want us to consider, or would you consider kind of neighborhood livability zones or whatever? And that was like 70%. They just said, would you consider it? And that's what we're doing right now. We're considering it and going, to what degree is this useful? To what degree is this workable? And great points brought up, Michael.
Thanks for your answers. I appreciate that.
Anybody else? Anybody? Anything? Okay, it's a start. I'm going to send out doodle poll if I can. All I ask is when I send it to you, answer it. And we'll try to get a couple date possibilities for a stuffing party and a discussion of all these other things prior to next month's meeting.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
You